every other so often, every decade or so, these mad psychopaths that rule you will want another crusade, because remember, they're mad. So crusade has been part of their gig since the early days. Right? The Merovingians, the Carolingians, they just don't go on crusades because they, feel like, nothing to do. They love it.
Yeah.
We got them doing it now, haven't we?
Exactly. My point there again, going back to what is happening today, have the connection with the past. What do we see now in the, in the Middle East, Iraq going into soon, Iran. I mean, we have Turkey on the borders going into Iraq now also. Ongoing. This is ongoing still,
That's right, and it will continue to go on until people discover a very simple fact, and that this is the normal, accepted behavior of psychopathic people. And you can either become infected by their epidemic, or you can, operate differently, holistically, as a healing agent in the world. One of the things that I do go into in the book, I don't know if we've ever done a show on it, is the fascinating psychological profile of Akhenaten himself.
We've talked a little bit about that, but yeah.
I think ever since I started looking into this whole question of the Atonists, a long time ago, it's never ceased to interest me about what on earth is this man who denied an underworld, who denied darkness. They all went to bed as soon as darkness fell. First of all, Akhenaten had his own city. He moved away from Thebes because he hated the Thebans. So he was desperate to get his own city, and they built it. It's called Akhetaten, or more correctly, Amarna. Now, and by the way, Amarna is very similar to the word Armagh in Ireland. Yeah, let's not get into that, but the word root thing is colossal, right?
Interesting, yeah.
But anyway, he moves to Amarna, and every single archaeologist who's ever gone out to either look at Amarna or dig up there has been struck by the horrible place. About the desert there is just so bright. It's so hot. It's probably one of the hottest places in Egypt. It's just the most inhospitable place. And yet here's this man goes out and builds his big open, city there because he was a sun worshipper. And these guys, when they moved out to Amarna, were so crazy, man. Well, as soon as darkness fell, they all ran into the house and would sleep. They thought, the night was evil. And I just can't grasp this. I mean, he's also coming out of a 35,000-year tradition of Egypt where, there was balance in everything. That the gods of the night and the gods of the underworld were worshipped as well. You see. He also moved his people to be buried at the Valley of the Kings. He didn't want his people buried with everybody else again because he didn't want to really be near any place that was sacred to the gods of the underworld. So you don't have to be Sigmund Freud or Carl Jung to realize that there's something seriously wrong with a person whose personality is entirely of the light. If anyone's watched, the work I've done on the connections between light and the ego, right? That the ego being, fractured and separate than the self. And we don't acknowledge our shadow. We don't acknowledge our unconscious, this old problem. But we live in an ego world and persona world. Well, there you got a pharaoh ruling the world who literally is of that psychological profile. Yeah. This has been acknowledged not by me, but by all the archaeologists and the thinkers. They haven't gone into it as much as I would have liked, but it certainly has been noticed that this person was definitely deranged. Now remember, let me add that 99% of the people who write on Akhenaten and on the Atonists are pro-Akhenaten and pro-Atonist. They think he was great. They think he was the Christ before the Christ, the Jesus before Jesus, the Moses before the Moses, who was just doing wonderful work, and all monotheism should bow in debt of gratitude to Akhenaten.
Yeah, there have been many of those, History Channel, Discovery Channel documentaries trying to, this enigmatic man, who was he? And it feels like they're trying to lift this up because, he was, I guess, thrown out of his own, land, basically. So did you think that they recognized at that time that he actually was, insane?
Well, after 17 years of the rule of a madman, they finally did realize it.
Yeah.
And they realized it so much that they wouldn't let him back. They really, the whole land, that's what I'm looking for today's world, you see. In fact, my book is pretty much dedicated to the Amonists, because I want to see something like this happen again. Not get rid of Akhenaten, but get rid of the legacy of Akhenaten and these, not just him, but his followers. I describe Judo-Christianity as Akhenaten's instrument of torture. Just like you make an Iron Maiden to put somebody in, or boiling oil or something. Man has been under Akhenaten's personal torture chamber, and it's called Judeo-Christianity. It's massacred millions of women. It has given us a negative energy towards animals and nature. It split man within his own psyche. It keeps us living in our ego. People who want to know this whole question of the ego, Do you know why you're in your ego? I mean, do you know that even the way the world system has been arranged contributes to the fact of why we're ego creatures as opposed to self? You know, shall we talk about the mysteries of melatonin, you see? And this whole cult of anti-darkness and anti-underworld that was started off with monotheism, this cult of the sun. Now remember, what we got to understand is that Atonism, which is pouring forth from the White House and pouring forth from 10 Downing Street, and people will know these connections when they read the book. But can we understand that this Atonism is not true solar theology? So I'm not indicting the solar cult. This is an aberration of solar theology. Solar theology is many thousands of years old. It's just like the lunar cult or the solar cult, you see, or the Vulcan cult or the Dionysian cult.
Sure.
Nothing wrong with these cults in general. But groups, factions of elites within these cults, like Akhenaten, chose to go against tradition and to morph and warp solar tradition. So what we have now is a aberrated form of solar worship that I refer to as Atonism, that Christians will refer to as Luciferianism, without knowing a lot about what they mean, sadly, right? I hope my book will help with that. My work will help with that. But when you say Luciferianism, you're actually accurate. It's right. Because Lucifer was the son of the morning, and the son of the morning is the sun. So the biblical heroes, Solomon, I mean, it's pretty obvious.
Yep.
You know, but Abraham, you see, we're dealing with David, right? All of these characters, Jesus, they've all been rescripted to operate as very, very narrow patrons or archetypes of this warped sun. The Caesars were that. The bloody royals today are the same. It's not true solar worship. That's why the Essenes didn't accept Jesus. They were solar cult. They didn't mind a solar hero. They had one. It's called John the Baptist. The Mandaeans had one, you see. Mithras was one. Zoroaster was one. But none of them was quite as warped as Akhenaten and his gang of followers. So you have factions and divisions even within the solar cult. Ammonism, the cult of Ammon-Ra, which is incredibly ancient, is a form of solar worship. But those guys at Thebes, Memphis, and Heliopolis were balanced. For every solar god they had the feminine counterpart. Yeah, Mut was one, vulture goddess Mut.
And there's no, nothing similar if we're talking about Akhenaten and his...
Oh, you must be joking. The man, many of the women in his court had a prefix to their name, Mut. It was a common term. He forbade them all to even use the terms of the goddess in their names. He only broke the rules with one wife that he loved very deeply. It's called Kia. She is the prototype of the biblical Eve. Kia, either because she was so bloody stubborn, or that he just had such a soft spot for her, he allowed her to keep her true name Mujnonet, which had the Mut in the beginning. You know what I mean? But everybody else was forbidden to show any pictures or altars or to those ancient gods. And the most hated of the gods was Amen-Ra, you see, and Osiris. And along with that gang, Horus would have been out. Ptah would have been probably out. You see, most of the pantheon, because Ptah was the regional god of Memphis. Well, Jesus, they were the Ammonists. There's nothing on earth that Akhenaten hated more than the Ammonists. So any god that they worshipped, like Atum-Ra, right, or Amen-Ra, who was the national god of Egypt, or any of the outlying provinces, you see, who had maybe gone for the worship of Sobek-Ra or Anubis, you see, or Hathor. Hathor, maybe allowed in. A little Isis would have been allowed, little bit. And that's because all priestesses, even in Atonism, were priestesses of Isis.
Okay.
It's just, again, it's the way that works. As a certain amount of Isis symbolism would have been okay, because Isis also represented the Nile. I mean, the Atonists couldn't live in Egypt without the Nile, so look, you have to bend the rules somewhere, right? So at a certain point, Isis would have been acceptable, but not in other aspects. Certain aspects of Isis would not have been accepted, you see. So Atonism, I think, if given a longer role, I mean, he was only in power 17 years. Had they been in power longer, all of these gods would have been eradicated. You don't know the devastation that hit Egypt when these psychopaths got in power.
And would you say that the sun also is attributed to the male principle, or the masculine?
Masculine, not male. Let's get this very clear. We're not talking about men and women here. Women can be just as masculine as some men, and men can be quite feminine. We're talking strictly about the metaphysical principles of masculine and feminine, not about male and female. This is very much picked up again in Egyptian history, where you have Hatshepsut, Hatshepsut strode around as a transvestite, dressing in men's clothes, with a whip, the big pharaoh, and she was a female.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a female there, Cleopatra, again, the same idea, really masculine.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have feminine pharaohs like Amenhotep or Amenhotep III. He was a total freak, right? A real cross-dressing psychopath, right? So you have a bunch of, feminine men, let's say, shall we say that, and masculine women, I'm being exaggerative, of course. But what we're dealing with here is a question of balance between male and female, yin and yang. Very androgynous concept here. And the pharaoh was the example, the perfect embodiment of the unification of opposites. He's it. His rituals, his performance, the way he wore his hair, the way they wore the clothes, the rituals that they did, the times of the year that they did them in, who he married. You see, you couldn't become pharaoh in Egypt unless you had married what was known as the great royal wife. The female decided who was the pharaoh. If you were not married to the right legal female, you are never going to become the king or prince of Egypt.
Interesting.
And this is why, and all these women, the top royal wives and the top princesses were priestesses of Isis. But you can't study Isis without studying the mystery of Osiris. Because in the mythology they're talking about balance to an extraordinary degree. The cult of, the mysteries of the story of Isis and Osiris and of Horus is very much based on this unification of opposites. The seeking for the missing phallus and all. I mean, incredible. The missing phallus, because that goes back to an even earlier dynasty of Egypt in which the phallus was personified as the obelisk, which is like the phallic symbol that pierced the night sky. At that point, it wasn't Osiris's phallus; it was Jeb, the earth god Jeb, and his consort was the sky goddess Nuth. They're the first Adam and Eve, by the way. Adam and Eve is based on Nuth, the sky goddess, and Jeb, the earth goddess, that later gets retransmuted into Osiris and Nephthys, or you also have each pantheon had different gods.
So this is way back.
Way back, going further back. Atum. But the one thing we have to realize is that in all the previous dynasties and all the previous teachings, whether you believe that Egyptian teachings was taken from Ireland or whether you don't, that's a separate question. But in all the ancient traditions of these countries, there was a balance. In fact, there may have even been a trinity. But there certainly was a duad, a perfect balance between, the banks of the Nile and the gods that were worshipped. In India it was the same. Have you ever heard about the Black Taj Mahal that was going to be constructed across from the White Taj Mahal? No, of course you don't, because they demolished that. They're a solar cult, and those Hindus are all another warped solar cult. But Shah Jahan, the builder of the Taj Mahal, everyone goes there, oh, that's just lovely. Look at that, isn't that wonderful? Take a photo. They don't know that across the river, exactly geomantically placed, was an enormous black marble. Was going to be a black marble. Taj Mahal.
Was it ever built?
No, he ran out of money, and he was overthrown by his insane son, Aurangzeb, who was more fundamental Muslim. He wasn't into all this Gnostic Sufi shit. So they thought, okay, forget that. The man was going to put 2 Taj Mahals with a river running between, like a Kundalini, and that black would have been where you go to contemplate the other side of life, not the negative side of life or the evil side of life. That's what you're getting when you are aberration. That's what you get post Atonism. That's what you get post Judeo-Christianity. That's what you get post Luciferian. Now anything dark, shadowy, feminine is evil. But the Gnostic, the mystic, the shaman, the druid knows that's nonsense. It's just another side of life. It's the mirror image. It's not about which side you like better on the chessboard. Tell me, is night preferable to day? Is a dead rose more beautiful or less beautiful than a live rose? I mean, what are we? If you blink your eye, is one blink that closes the eye in darkness better than the blink that opens it to the light? I mean, you'd think you were insane if that's the stuff you'd hear from an insane person in a rubber room talking. I don't blink, man. It's real evil to blink. You know what? I keep my eyes totally open all the time. Watch me, I never blink. Because those little moments when the lid comes down and there's darkness, whoa, you don't want that. Then I'm under the power of the devil. You know something? I'm hearing the same crap. I hear the same nonsense, the same psychopathy you see from these people who have inherited this warped solar philosophy. So in Egyptology and the ancient studies, everything was balanced. A ritual done on this side must be balanced with a ritual on that side. They got on Aleister Crowley's case because he had 2 temples in London. One was all in white, and had just a nice altar and all of that.